Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include Diablo 3 being moved to Blizzard's classic games team, Sony's lack of cross-play support continuing to piss off the entire gaming industry, Overwatch players upset over the new hero, and more. As always, discussion timestamps are in the video description, and a gentle reminder to ring the sub-notification bell to be alerted of new Saturday episodes. Let's kick things off with a quick story about the developers of Left 4 Dead working on a new project. Details are scant, but we know it's an unannounced title in, quote, a globally known franchise. Now, before we go ahead and jump on Left 4 Dead 3, which would be awesome, we have to remember that Turtle Rock Studios, the devs behind Left 4 Dead, no longer own Left 4 Dead. It is now Valve that owns Left 4 Dead. Furthermore, we know about this new project due to job listings, and in those job listings, we know that it'll be, one, a AAA title, but we also know that what they're looking for is someone who can work on, quote, competitive and balanced map layouts. This seems to point towards some kind of a competitive FPS, particularly because Turtle Rock Studios is known for making FPS games. I believe only one of their games ever has not been an FPS. And just as a reminder of what they've sort of been up to after Left 4 Dead, they made Evolve. If you have any theories on what they could be working on, sound off in the comments. Next, let's talk about Fallout 76. Seems like Bethesda's Todd Howard has been given more details, or at least answering questions in interviews, and overall just confusing us a whole lot more as to what the heck is going on in Fallout 76. Now, as reported by PC Gamer in an interview with multiplayer.it, Howard expressed that in Fallout 76 there will be fast travel, there will not be mounts or vehicles, and players under level 5 can't be killed by other players. Compound this with our existing information on what we know about this game already, and people are just more confused. Some people think this will just be a co-op Fallout game, others think this is going to be basically a Rust-style game. Cutthroat, open world, PvP, and the information that's just been revealed is leading to a lot of conflicting theories and almost seems to be contradicting itself at times. So to just clarify some stuff that we do know for sure, we know that the game is multiplayer. We know for sure that you will see other players, however, you're not forced to interact with them. You can play the game solo. There's a long-term plan to add custom servers so that you can truly play solo with no one else on your server but yourself, or you could invite friends to your server and you can install mods, but again, this is all for much later after launch. We know that when you go offline, your base disappears, so people can't destroy your base while you're offline. And it seems that PvP is entirely optional. It seems like you can't get killed unless you agree to PvP or something. Again, the details are kind of all over the place. We do know that you can choose to be a merchant. You could buy from other players, sell to other players. You can craft stuff, be a vendor. Apparently you can set up some kind of a bot, like a literal bot, a robot, to sell your wares for you as sort of like setting up a shop. And it just seems that a lot of the hype and anti-hype around this game revolves around people jumping to conclusions about what this game is without quite having all the right evidence there. It seems the people that are very opposed to this game, they seem to be focused on the worst case scenario of what this game could turn out to be, and those really on board with it are sort of jumping on some fantasy of what it potentially could be in a positive way. I think we have to just continue to wait for this trickle of information from Todd Howard to come out here. I'm trying to stay optimistic, but it just seems that with every new interview, we learn something about this game that kind of shifts what I thought it was in my mind. Now, this will segue us into our next topic on Sony and crossplay, because in another interview, as reported by Game Informer, Todd Howard spoke with the German website GameStar.de. In it, he was asked about crossplay for Fallout 76, and he said, quote, "We would love to do that, but right now that's not possible." He paused and then added, "Sony isn't being as helpful as we want them to be." Now, it seems in general, devs avoid speaking out against Sony on the whole crossplay thing, but we've been getting more and more hints here and there from different devs. And while speculation existed for a while, it's all but confirmed now that Sony really is the kid that doesn't want others to play with his ball. With all the other crossplay we're seeing now between other platforms, it is abundantly clear that Sony is the sole reason why we don't have crossplay between PS4 and other consoles. And Sony can say whatever they want, but it's pretty clear that the reason is greed. Let's face it, the PlayStation is winning the current generation console war. PS4 has a lion's share of the player base. PS4 tends to have more players for any given game than any other platform. Now, in multiplayer games, having access to more people to game with is an obvious plus. No one likes to try to play a multiplayer game only to be faced with empty servers. So it's obviously advantageous for smaller platforms to want to have access to the player base of larger platforms. As a small-scale example, if you have an Xbox One and your friends have PS4s, then you obviously really want crossplay so that you can play with your friends. And if you can't get crossplay, then you might be tempted to buy a PS4 just so that you can play with your friends. And it seems that's what Sony's going for. They don't want to enable crossplay to try to convert more people to their platform. Now, if you look at the example of Fortnite Battle Royale, for instance, a game that has been exploding across a number of platforms recently and enabling cross-platform play as much as it possibly can, you'll see that PS4 players, while they can play with PC players and even mobile players, cannot play with Xbox One or Nintendo Switch players. However, Xbox One and Nintendo Switch have no such limitations. They can play with each other. And Nintendo has historically been the most opposed to crossplay, so you really know Sony's a problem when even Nintendo is allowing crossplay before the PS4. Now you might ask, why do they enable crossplay with PC and mobile and not with the Xbox One and the Nintendo Switch? And you can argue that it might just be a matter of which platform they consider their greatest competition. I don't think that Sony is seriously concerned about competing with mobile. No one's going to decide to buy a smartphone over a PS4 to play games. Similarly, I don't think Sony is too concerned about the PC player base either. They're not concerned about the PC gamer master race people, and they figure that the people that are going to have more casual systems are more likely to want to play on a console anyway. Xbox has obviously been their main competition for the longest time, and it just seems like they'll do anything to discourage people from going to Xbox. Now, one thing that needs to be noted is that while Sony does allow for crossplay between PC, PS4, and mobile, if you link your Epic Games account for Fortnite to your PSN account, then you can no longer use that Epic account to play Fortnite on PC or on mobile. And that's been a huge outrage in the community. That means that all the progress you make on one platform, all the purchases you might make, cannot be transferred between the platforms after. Now that said, Sony has spoken up in that regard, saying that they might be looking into a compromise there, but it's certainly a jerk move. On to some Path of Exile news. Patch 3.3.1 released this week. We spoke about that patch last week. I'll link the patch notes in the video description. Amongst a bunch of other stuff, we get 2 new incursion rooms, and again, link in the description with the full details on those. Path of Exile celebrating a milestone, having reached gold on Steam so far throughout the year of 2018. This of course refers to how much revenue it's earned. Now bear in mind that platinum is the highest category and gold is the second highest category. In platinum we see CSGO, GTA 5, Vermintide 2, and Path of Exile finds itself in gold alongside such titles as Total War, Warhammer 2, Dragon Ball FighterZ, and Divinity Original Sin 2. Now what's important to note here, according to game director Chris Wilson, is that almost half of the user base isn't even on Steam, and therefore all of their data is not being factored in. Now let's move on to some controversy in the world of Path of Exile, and you can argue that this story has to do with the Path of Exile dev team effectively helping scammers. That's a very incendiary statement, and we'll explain how we get there. So on the official Path of Exile forums, you can obviously start threads, and there's different sections in which to start threads. So we have a player who posts a thread in one part of the forum, and to simplify here, he's selling a service. He'll kill any boss for you in exchange for in-game currency. And he states that he guarantees success, and if he fails, he'll refund you. So a buyer takes him up on his offer, they make the exchange of currency, which the seller has to use either in full or in part to open up a portal to the boss area, and the seller accidentally kills the boss before the buyer manages to get into the area, and thus the buyer does not get credit for killing the boss, which was the entire reason for this exchange. Now the seller offers to do the boss fight again, but he asks for, once again, the currency needed to open the portal. Now the buyer believes, well hey, you screwed up, not me. Why should I be paying again for you to open the portal? You should open the portal. In your posts, you gave a money-back guarantee that you wouldn't fail. So the buyer posts in the forum thread what happened and stated, would not recommend, in order to warn other potential buyers. Within minutes, his post was removed by the mods, and he received a message stating, I have removed the following comment as it was causing harm to the reputation of another player which breaches our code of conduct. Now the mod was technically within his rights. In fact, more so, he was doing his job by removing the buyer's post, because the code of conduct does not allow for any negative feedback to be left about another player. But it seems like a pretty broken system to allow a section where people can post their services for sale and then not allow anyone to leave negative feedback about those services. That's not helping the consumer. That's helping scammers. Now, it seems the workaround here is to email the support staff of GGG, explain what happened, and if this guy gets enough complaints, then they'll classify him as a scammer and remove him. But in the meantime, he's still doing harm. Now, what I'm saying here is that there's gotta be a better system for this. I understand that you don't want witch hunts and you don't want people just slandering other people. I can get behind that sentiment, but if you're gonna have a section where you're allowing someone to sell their services, it stands to reason that you should allow for politely worded feedback, and by the looks of it, this individual's feedback was very politely worded. But I turn the question to you folks, what are your thoughts, and what kind of a solution to this situation can you think of? And we'll wrap up our Path of Exile news here with a segue into our Diablo news. We got this beautiful piece of artwork made by Redditor Cowheap, and looking at it, you might recognize something familiar about the composition, and that's because it was an homage to this piece of Diablo 2 artwork. I think Cowheap did a fantastic job, and I think what I like most about this piece is the perhaps implicit or inadvertent message of, hey, we can be Diablo fans and Path of Exile fans. So on to our Diablo news. Let's get straight into job postings. Under the Diablo section, there are now no more job postings. There was executive producer, it is now gone. Under the unannounced project section, we have one new job posting for Diablo for a software engineer, tools, and audio. But the big news for me is looking at the classic games section, and I haven't paid much attention to this recently, so I'm not sure when this was added, but we see a position for senior software engineer. And in the job description, it states explicitly that it is for the Diablo franchise. Now, classic games is Blizzard's section for games that are no longer under active development. Most of us think, oh, Diablo 1 and Diablo 2, but I'm gonna make the argument that Diablo 3 has been moved to classic games, and that this job posting is for Diablo 3. Now, if we go through this job posting, we'll see that under requirements, you must be fluent in C++. We'll come back to that. And as a plus, no pun intended, knowledge of rendering architecture and associated APIs, shaders, animations, skinning, lighting, and special effects, and experience developing on multiple platforms. Now, does this sound more like a job posting for a D1 or D2 remaster or for Diablo 3? Because I know that when we see Diablo in classic games, we want to think D1, D2 remaster. And I'm not saying that these are not potentially also projects happening. But if we're talking about developing games for multiple platforms, well, Diablo 3 is currently on multiple platforms. D1 and D2 are not currently on any multiple platforms, so we'd be talking about, yes, possibly a D1 or D2 remaster that is also on maybe mobile or something. I'm not saying that's outside of the realm of possibility, but the simplest answer is that we're talking about Diablo 3. When we're talking about shaders and skinning, these are things that are not, to my knowledge, in Diablo 1 or Diablo 2. These are more applicable to Diablo 3, particularly skins. D1 and D2 were made with sprites. There were no 3D models to apply skins to. And then lastly, C++. I tried to do some research, there's no clear answer, but it seems that Diablo 3 was likely programmed with C++. However, D1 and D2 were likely programmed more with C and maybe a little bit of C++, but, and again, it's not super clear, it seems that C++ only really released a stable version around the year 1998, which was after the release of Diablo 1 and after the start of development of Diablo 2. So it does make sense that if we're just looking at C++, we're not talking about D1 or D2. And to further corroborate that, if we look at the other job postings in classic games, we got one entry for StarCraft Remastered, we got another entry for Warcraft 3, and for both of these, they mention in the job postings both C and C++. I'll rephrase that. Their job postings for their remasters of their old games list C and C++, whereas the Diablo franchise game just says C++. The gaming industry over the years switched from C to C++. Now I'm going to hang an asterisk on this and say that I am not an expert in this. I am not a developer, I'm not a programmer, I'm not a coder, but the distinction of the job postings does seem significant. And then the last thing I'll point out is that for the other two games, they state the exact titles, StarCraft Remaster, Warcraft 3. For this one, they're just saying Diablo franchise. Now you can argue, well, that's just because they haven't announced the Diablo 1 or D2 remaster yet. And yeah, that is definitely one explanation, but I'd say another explanation is because they don't want to say that Diablo 3 is in maintenance mode, has been shunted over to classic games. While I don't believe it's a bad thing if this is the reality, it's not a bad sign that Diablo 3 is now in the hands of classic games. From a PR point of view, yeah, it's probably not something you want to announce and say, we're retiring Diablo 3 to our classic games department. But what this means is that the Diablo team is now fully working on the new projects rather than on Diablo 3. Classic games, their job is to maintain. We've seen a couple of seasons now with no new content in Diablo 3. Yes, we have theme seasons, but from the looks of it, this might be pretty low effort, low content type of changes. It looks like they're trying to maximize the impact while minimizing the amount of development cost. And now the Diablo team has fully been transitioning over to working on their new project or projects. But again, this is speculation. This is my interpretation, and I throw the question to you folks, what do you think about this? And we'll close up the Diablo portion of this video with this look at this sick sleeve tattoo by Becker Constantine. Alright, on to Overwatch news. It seems the community is pretty split on its reception to the new hero, Wrecking Ball, aka Hammond. And we have a couple community issues, the first being his name. So we first learned of this hero by the name of Hammond. He was hinted at in the lore, so now a lot of the community is just calling him Hammond, even though his proper hero name in-game is Wrecking Ball. So there's almost a petition or a movement going to encourage Blizzard to just rename the character in-game to Hammond. I know I preferentially call him Hammond, and I feel that anyone who has known him from the lore as Hammond will keep calling him that, but new players or players who are not dialed into the community, they're gonna know him as Wrecking Ball now. That is, unless you can change the name before release. So I turn the question to you folks. Do you prefer Hammond or Wrecking Ball? I personally prefer Hammond because that's what we've been calling this mystery character for months now. And I similarly think that the name Wrecking Ball isn't particularly inspired. But I could understand how someone who has never heard of Hammond before would definitely think the name Wrecking Ball is more cool over Hammond. And then the second complaint from the community, which is really the bigger one, is that Hammond is basically too silly to be in Overwatch. And again, there's a big divide in the community on this. Some people love Hammond, Wrecking Ball rather, and others are just like, okay, no, what is going on here? This is the straw that broke the camel's back. Like, okay, we could have accepted Winston being a gorilla with sentience and that can speak. We could accept all these other things, but when it comes to Hammond, it's just too much. And I could kind of feel that way. My initial reaction to Hammond was that. I couldn't quite vocalize how I felt, but I definitely wasn't hype about this character. It just seemed a bit too silly to me. He just seems too much of a gimmick character, I guess. I don't hate Hammond as much as some people seem to dislike him, but you know, every other character seems to have more depth to them, more backstory, more than just the immediate base thing, and Hammond just seems to be that gimmick character. It's a hamster that controls a robot. How? He has no opposable thumbs. How does he do it? He doesn't have the strength to operate machinery to build this. How does he do it? You know, for some people, it's maybe a suspension of disbelief thing that, okay, the other things in the game you can lore explain, you know, a gorilla, makes sense. We would experiment on gorillas, make hyper-intelligent gorillas. Gorillas have physical strength, they have opposable thumbs, they could do things, they're similar to humans, but a hamster is just pushing it too far. He just seems like a joke character. But then, what about Jetpack Cat? Because I feel like the community was really fully on board for Jetpack Cat, but now that we got Wrecking Ball Hamster, it's just no. The wrong type of animal. Where do you fall in this debate? Do you like Hammond? Do you not like Hammond? And if you don't like Hammond, why? And that's going to wrap up this video. As a reminder, leave a comment on any and every topic that we covered. And if you have an idea for a story that you'd like to see us cover in a future video, you can head on over to the subreddit and post a link. If you haven't already, feel free to check out last week's episode where we talk about Google's potential gaming platform. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider becoming a Royal Raider on Patreon, where you can unlock a variety of backer rewards, including behind-the-scenes content, virtual monthly meetups, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more gaming content.